Smithfield Special Called Council Meeting, November 14th, 2024. Notice is hereby given pursuant to the Texas Open Meetings Act, Vernon's Annotated Civil Statute, Article 625217, that the city of Smithfield will conduct a special called council meeting November 14th, 2024 at 5:30 p.m. in the council chambers of City Hall, 317 Main Street, Smithfield, Texas. I open the meeting. First item on the agenda is a presentation from Jason Rammel on the boards and commission handbooks, the ethics policy ordinance, and the policy on prohibited technologies. Take it away, Mr. Rammel.
Right. Okay, is that on? All right. So we've got 3 items on here. I don't know what order you want to take them in. We can take them in whatever order you want. The boards and commissions handbook y'all have looked at before. I think the last time I talked about this was in July. There's kind of a lot to it. It's basically just an update of what the city already had in place, kind of cleaned up, things clarified, other things sort of, I guess, updated to reflect what is actually going on in the cities. There were some corrections to state law that I made sort of throughout. The big thing that I think we sort of kind of ended on was there's the ethics policy within that handbook. The ethics policy as drafted, what's before you, was more or less already there and has always been there. And then this body asked me to put together an ethics ordinance because the ethics policy only applies to boards. The ethics ordinance that we can talk about as well is going to apply to city council members, board members, and what's called municipal officers. So people like Robert and chief of police and things like that. So what would y'all like to talk about?
I guess we just go through them in order,
Okay.
or how do you usually do this?
As far as the ethics or the board policy, the boards and commissions handbook, like I said, we went through it in July.
Right, and we added and took some stuff out.
And I know that there were some comments, but I don't recall. What changes actually needed. So I know there were some questions. So the draft that we have is the one that was last sent.
I'll make some general comments if mayor and council allow me to do so.
Yes, please do.
Okay, so the boards and commissions handbook, I've gone through it. It does a great job of defining what type of boards we have, the terms of service, the requirements, and then the enforcement policy when there is a complaint. Under the boards and commissions, it's very succinct in that whomever is the person being, the ethics violator alleged, let's say it's on the long name committee, and one of those members is accused of X, Y, and Z. The head of that committee, unless they're the person accused, would be responsible for convening the ethics committee in and of itself, which includes the head of that board plus 2 council members ad hoc that don't have a vested interest in whatever board or policy is being challenged. Okay. Pretty clear and succinct. Compare that to the ethics policy and the creation of a 5-member ad hoc commission. I think that's a little cumbersome if you take the 2 in aggregate as to what you're trying to achieve. So under the ethics policy, you have a complaint, and then the commission is then brought together after the complaint, and you have 3 days to do that. So getting 5 members that you guys appoint is going to be tough, I would imagine. And what I like about the boards and commission's handbook is that it picks the person who's most knowledgeable of that entity's function. I don't think you're going to have that with a citizen that you pull off the street, whether that's with reference to the long name committee, the housing authority, the hospital authority, the airport advisory board, the library board, all the boards that we have. I think it's important to have someone from that entity that knows what's going on and can help further assess whether that's a valid claim or not. Anyway, that's just some general comments that I have. I have no problem what you want to eventually combine or take out. But I think Jason's point is the boards and commissions handbook in and of itself had a process and of enforcement and convening an ethics board to address whatever complaint there was. You ask for a separate ethics policy that does the same thing, but I think it's more cumbersome. So that's my comment.
Mayor, I have some questions. Okay, I do remember, I did not go back and scrub notes out, Jason, but I remember there was a lot of talk. It was mostly cleanup, I think, on the handbook. My clarifying point I recall wanting was, is this applied to council? It really is not applying to council. This is just kind of a policy handbook for the employees. And I think what the handbook document represents is just the cleanup of all of that. Is that a fair assessment? Nothing really substantively different. Now, there is an ethics ordinance that we have as a separate document here, right?
Right. So
That applies to us.
right. And so this project started off, this sort of started off with just the boards and commissions handbook. And that document is designed to just sort of distill the rules and regulations that apply to boards and commissions so that they can have it handy for their meetings or whatever.
Exclusive of the council.
Exclusive of the council. It just applies to the boards and commissions.
Right.
Just provide some guidance on, how they work, what their obligations are, how they're appointed, et cetera. So it references city ordinances and state statutes in that regard.
Yeah.
As it has existed for a while, since the 90s, it has had its own ethics policy within it. What I would recommend is sort of getting rid of the ethics policy within the handbook, adopting an ethics ordinance, and then whatever that ordinance looks like, just sort of gets incorporated into the handbook, just like everything else, and just says, this is how it's going to work.
And that's what this ordinance document is.
And
purports
the
to.
ordinance is drafted is going to apply to city council members, boards and commissions, and municipal officers under the ordinance. So you don't really need the separate ethics policy within the handbook because it's sort of separate. But that was in existence before I was asked to do the ordinance.
So Mayor, are we talking about kind of any of these? Or are we trying to limit it to go through one at a time? What do you want to do? Well, I do on the ordinance, but I mean, do you want to dispense with the handbook, and are we taking action and motions and approving it, Robert?
The second is
Yeah.
discussion and action on adopting the
Okay.
new boards and
Okay,
commission
so do you
policy.
want to just open it up? We can ask about anything, or do you want to go through and
Do you have any questions with the new?
I don't
boards?
any on the handbook at all personally. I mean, I
Okay,
don't know about
so-
the colleagues do, but I do have some about the ordinance.
On the-
But
Well,
if you,
I'm sorry, but the handbook, there's something that was brought up to me from Judy Bergeron. Service on the commissions requires that you be a resident, but there are two boards that have multi-jurisdictional. You got residents and then jurisdiction participation. The library board is one of those, as is the airport advisory board. 3 people residents and two in the ETJ. So that needs to be changed. Just when I get on record, I need to modify that in the handbook, is that it's not limited to just residents only. Where there's multi-jurisdictional involvement, like the library.
I thought the library did. The one that I thought that we allowed people that were commercial owners was in the long name. I thought the library one did have in there. Am I not remembering it right? I thought the library one did say that as long as you were within the area. Yeah, I think that's what.
Just want to make sure that.
Yeah, the one thing that I did, the handbook, I think, doesn't specify. I think it says that you have to be a citizen to be on the long name. And I thought we had long name members that were not within the city limits. I may be remembering it wrong. It's under there's a qualifications section of residency.
So it says, unless provided in state or federal law, the Smithville Code of Ordinances, or any other governing rule or document, only residents of the city of Smithville. So that's the default. Is there something regarding, as far as the ordinance or regulations pertaining to the library, that say where the board members come from?
Our service area is aligned with the school.
Okay.
So some of our board members come from outside city limits.
Okay, so let's see. So one thing we need to make sure is, what does our ordinance say? And the ordinance may be silent. Like, we have an ordinance that creates the library board and says, this is how it works. It may or may not, and I don't remember off the top of my head, say how the library board members are appointed, but I'll probably address that in the section that says 2.3, and it talks, it has like the lettered sections. This is P and Z, is this. I'll address the library board in that. I'll make sure now, if the library board, if our ordinance doesn't say library board members may be appointed within the service area, then we need to adjust the ordinance to make that, if that's what we're actually doing and that's what the city council wants to keep doing, then we'll need to actually adjust the ordinance so that we can say board members may be appointed from the service area. And specify that it is contiguous with the school district.
Is the end goal to combine this into one?
No.
No, do the opposite.
Yeah.
Do the
Keep the
opposite.
handbook separate.
Yeah.
And the handbook is just sort of a synopsis, something easy for them, for board members to just sort of have handy for reference. The ordinance itself are the actual rules. Because the handbook talks about Open Meetings Act, Public Information Act, conflicts of interest under state law, those kinds of things.
So on page 6 under 2.3, it expressly says that only residents of the city of Smithville are eligible to serve on a board.
Yeah, unless otherwise provided in state statute or federal law or ordinance. And then there's also specific eligibility requirements for P and Z, Hospital Authority, Housing Authority, Historical Committee, and Airport Advisory Board. So when I was reviewing this, so yeah, so you have so that's if you see the library board, thank you for pulling that up. I don't think it says where they need to be from. Do they have to be citizens? Do they have to be?
They can fall back on that.
So the default is, because it's a city board, they have to be residents of the city. So if we want to change that, then we need to actually change this ordinance to say library board may be appointed from. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that would be, right, we would change the ordinance. And I would specify that in the handbook.
You're the one that deals with that a lot. Okay.
Would it be appropriate to add that to page 6? Because there's no mention of the library board for eligibility.
Yeah, so I would do both.
Okay.
Well, I recommend doing both.
So what you've got up there is specific to the library board, right?
Right, but
And
he's gonna
this-
add it into the 2.3.
Yeah,
he's
he's
gonna
gonna
just-
2.3 in the hand.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
So that's really a subset.
Yeah, it'll be F. It'll go
for
from
failure,
to the
right?
end.
Not the library.
Anything else, guys? So that will be changed there.
So the airport zoning board and the airport advisory board are different.
Yeah, and we don't have an airport zoning board anymore,
Right.
so we need to.
Yeah,
Fix
so
that
there's an
next round,
airport
too.
advisory board.
Yeah.
And I don't remember. I can't remember where that came from. I think it's a separate standalone thing. Because I know I have it, it says 2 members of the board must be Smithville residents, the remaining 7 may live outside the city limits, but must live within the immediate area of the city. I quoted that, so I assume that came from somewhere. So whatever document it was that created the airport advisory board, that's where that language came from.
It's actually 5 total members, so
It's 5,
as opposed to 7. Yeah,
okay. So instead of 9, it's 5 total,
I'm sorry, 7 total.
okay.
Yeah.
So 5. Got it.
5, that's what I meant to say. It depends on if you're through, if they're through reviewing the document.
I know, but we're gonna add it, though, so we won't.
Yeah, with the corrections.
Okay.
Is there an ethics commission? Or is that to be established?
So, yeah, so under the ordinance
Yeah.
that I prepared, it establishes an ethics commission.
And that's the next thing on here.
Under the
That'd be number,
ethics policy in the board handbook, it doesn't have that mechanism. And Robert and I have talked about that, and the mechanism in the handbook is basically whatever board it is. It's the chair of that board and then 2 members of city council make up the ethics commission. And the issue that we'll have to sort of sort out is the role, what happens if there's an ethics complaint against the city council.
We call it two different things. In the handbook for the boards and commissions, we talk about an ethics committee.
Right.
And then when we move over to the city personnel, we call it an ethics commission.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
They're the same thing. I mean, it's just that, like I said, the ethics policy in the boards and boards and commission handbook was sort of pre-existing. That's the language it used. I can tell you that in our office, when we draft these, we use the term commission as opposed to committee. So that's why it's in there.
So, okay.
They mean the same thing.
So in the event of an enforcement procedure being raised in the handbook for the boards and commissions, if you have a situation where the ethics committee is chosen and it's outlined how that is done, consisting of 2 city council members and 1 member of the relevant board. Let's say that the event doesn't rise to the threshold of actually creating or saying that we're going to do something, and it stops there.
Yes.
So what notification procedures in place that we as council, I think that we as council should be informed that there was something there, whether it rose to the level of action being taken.
Right.
And I
So
don't know, I don't see that there's any notification.
within the policy, within the boards, within the handbook, there's not that mechanism. Okay. Within the ethics ordinance, there is. And the ethics, there's a term as ethics compliance officer, is actually the city attorney. And that's the person that sort of does the initial intake and says, do we actually have a violation of the ethics ordinance? And if so, then that's when it gets forwarded on to the city council to create whatever, if it's going to be an ethics, that sort of 3-person committee. And then if it is rises to that level, everybody gets notified, like, hey, there's been an ethics complaint against you,
But if it doesn't rise to that level, then we're not necessarily, we as a council being notified.
you may not. I mean, if you
I would like
want
us
to build
to-
that in, you
I
definitely.
would like us to have, this is my opinion, I would like us to have that in there that,
Yeah.
hey, here's what's
That-
happened, even though. it
That's one of
didn't
mine.
rise.
That's one of mine too. I think we should be notified. The council should be aware of anybody that makes a complaint. The other thing is on the page, this is on the ordinance, on 102053A, it references an ad hoc basis for the ethics committee, and then you go back towards the end.
What page is that, Tom?
It's not really numbered.
It's not.
It's
It's,
1.02.053. Ethics Commission is the bold heading. It's A. It says creation of the Ethics Commission will be established on an ad hoc basis. Then you go back towards the end and it makes reference to the standing ethics commission. So my question is, do we have a standings ethics commission, or do we do it on an ad hoc basis?
Okay, so. Yeah, so right now, so it's appointed on an ad hoc basis under 053, like you said,
And then 058,
058, let's see, hold on, it says.
1C, refer the complaint to the standing ethics commission.
Right,
Are you in
So-
the handbook or in the?
I'm in the
Ordinance.
ordinance.
handbook.
the Ethics Commission.
You're in the ordinance?
Yeah, I'm just trying, I think it's item 3 on the agenda. I'm just trying to get some consistency. I just want to understand, are we proposing that we just do it on ad hoc?
So an 058, what subsection?
1C?
Oh, okay, D1C.
Where it says refer the complaint to the standing.
So
ethics-
yeah, that's, you know what, I had my initial draft had a standing ethics commission that existed all the time.
Okay.
And then I changed my mind at the end and forgot to change this part.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, so
yeah, so that would be C. C should just go away.
I am
That's on-
sorry.
but
Tyrone
that's
and
on
I
the
don't know where we
ethics.
are. What C are we looking at?
Okay, so if you look, it's 102.5058 says notice investigation, then it's A, B, C, D, and then it's D1.
Item 3's, Mitch, up there, in there, right there. It's in that part.
So this is the section. But if you look at the ordinance, that's this.
Okay, I'm going out of my own notes. That's the problem. Okay, I'm with you.
Jason, did I hear you talk about at the beginning of this of taking the ethics part out of the boards and commissions, dovetailing it all together underneath the ordinance for the other? Is that?
Right,
what you
so
say?
what I would recommend is, now that we've got an actual ordinance and your in my opinion, and it's best to have an ethics ordinance if this is something you want to have some force. And so what I would recommend is whatever y'all decide on the ethics ordinance and how you want it to work and what you want it to say, I would incorporate that into the handbook, get rid of what's there now. And then just take the ordinance and put it in the handbook as far as, you know, and with the sort of as a user friendly.
It would all be in one place.
It would all be in one place. That way because that's the idea of the handbook is this right there. And that way it'll refer to sections. If they want to look at the section, it'll sort of give general overview of how it works.
Mhm.
And then the actual nuts and bolts will be in the ordinance itself.
And that will include the city council within the part of that.
Well, the boards and,
Like that.
so the boards and handbook, I mean, the boards and commission handbook only applies to boards and commissions.
Mhm.
So they're the only people that are gonna get it. So it would be, the references, the ordinance is gonna apply to council members, boards and commissions,
Mhm.
and municipal officers. So within the handbook, it'll just say, you know, these are the rules for board members.
But it's pretty much the same.
It'll be pretty much the same thing.
Same thing.
Yes, sir.
I'm pretty much
So
good with
Jason,
that.
do we, as a council or an ad hoc committee, do we have the power and authority to subpoena and to hold people in contempt and to fine?
I believe so. I think I've got that built in here.
No, it's in there. I'm just
Yeah.
wondering if we actually have that.
Oh, yeah,
authority. Can we compel people at that level to do that
Yes.
under state law? Okay.
As far as I'm aware, I know we've done it before. The other thing is there's actually a provision in there. And I've seen this happen, where there's frivolous complaints and where you can actually sanction them.
Yeah.
And make them pay your attorney's fees. Which actually, my boss actually took that case for the city of Laredo, like to the Texas Supreme Court and won on it and said, yes, we can do that. So,
The bad part about that could probably work both ways, though. If the city was meant, no, okay, good, then I'm glad for that. That's a good way.
no, cities are immune. Unless it's something, you know, federal 1863 or whatever, 1983.
Wow,
Eight-
that's
eight-
way back.
No, it's a section. It's
It's a section.
1863 is a road by my house, and I always mix it up with 1983. Because I'm on 1863 a whole lot more than I am on 1983.
Who remembers 1993?
As part of the ethics, the pulling together the ad hoc commission, the language here states that after a complaint is received, that the council will convene and appoint a 5-member commission with 2 alternates within 3 days of the receipt of the complaint.
Yeah, and we can
That-
change that.
Because to
If you
call
want
a
it to be-
meeting,
If you want it to be more like what's in the handbook, that's easy. That's an easy fix.
The two, Yeah, the two things that stuck out to me were, one, I think the city council ought to be made aware on some sort of frequent, cadence, any complaints that are filed, to just so they're aware, even if they don't get past the gatekeeper, which is the city attorney.
Mhm.
And the second is, I think we ought to maybe revisit the ethics policy more frequently than every 5 years. I think it's stated currently at 5. I think we should at least do it every 2 years. Just revisit it because of evolving standards for. So I think it's a 5-year rotation. That would only be the only comment. And I'm not going to live with the 5. Anybody could bring it up at any point and ask it to be revisited. I just think as a policy, we ought to not put it to bed for 5 years. We ought to look at it more frequently than every 5 years. And that's in 102055, I think, A.
And it also says down here, the adoption, the Ethics Commission has the authority to establish, adopt, and amend any procedural rules and regulations necessary to properly execute commission business. So they kind of have a little leeway
Yeah.
within that.
Yeah, and it says no less than 5, so it doesn't say it has to be 5. I'm just saying, I think it'd be a good practice for us to visit it more
2?
frequently. I think 2 would be great, but I just think 5's too much. Now, city manager, did we get any input from citizens or did anybody get any comments from anybody about the?
I think the only person that has brought up stuff would be Brittany.
Yeah.
And she did that long ago.
So one thing I would point out is that under, as drafted, as far as the notice is concerned, it's a 102.057, and then it's C 7 or no, 8. Or right above where it says frivolous complaints. Yeah, I'm sorry, these pages aren't numbered. Don't have page numbers, and I'm always like, what page numbers are?
057, what?
Oh, 57.
5-7
E
E.
8. No,
EA.
C 8.
C,
C,
written
Written
ethics complaint,
ethics complaint,
and then to,
number
It's
8.
if the ethics compliance officer determines, is that the way it starts?
Yes,
Yeah.
and it says a complaint dismissed for non-compliance before the city manager and the mayor.
Yeah,
So,
and that's where we would add the city council, right? Because that's what we were just talking
No,
about, is that the council be made aware of those.
well, that's why it was forwarded to the mayor.
Yeah.
So if
Well, as
you want
long
me to
as-
put something, the mayor will notify council.
Yeah,
saying that's
absolutely.
fine.
Absolutely.
okay.
Gotta get page numbers, Jason.
I'm telling
I
you,
know.
I know it.
I want to go back and ask your experience. So in other municipalities, this timing, as you can say, I'm concerned about this.
Yeah,
Because yes, you got to,
it's a short time window, and I totally get wanting to change it.
but does it work with ad hoc? Is it better to appoint, if you're going to have an ethics commission, is it better to appoint one that's permanent over years, or do it ad hoc like you're saying,
I think for the city of Smithville,
ad hoc?
ad hoc, there's no need to create a standing committee that has nothing to do.
Thank you.
I can tell you in other cities, they're very busy, but it just depends on the city.
We don't need another.
Yeah. So I think I like the, for Smithville, I like the idea of we'll just get these 3 people to handle it and let them do it.
Or maybe you change that to 7 days ad hoc versus 3
Or,
because of
yeah, I'll
notification.
change it to, we'll just say within a reasonable time.
Because, but I'm correct in the way this is written, that a complaint comes in, the way it's written, we have 3 days to convene the council and appoint the committee to address the complaint. And that's just not enough time.
No, I'm with you.
Okay.
Yeah. 3 business, yeah.
We're already, that wasn't in the.
yeah, we've been in ethics for a
Yes.
while.
So,
Yeah, I'll simplify this part.
So,
Now, to be clear, so if you have a boards and commissions complaint, you would refer to this policy and follow this policy to address the complaint for the boards and commissions member.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Because this ordinance is going to apply to them too.
Ordinance.
And so like I said, I'll change the draft boards and commission handbook to reflect the new ordinance. Because right now it reflects an old policy.
that makes sense. Okay. Very good.
I'm going to ask her something, excuse me.
So whatever we do, whatever occurs, what I'm saying is that the council should in addition be notified
Yes,
of whatever,
yes.
because that's not there.
No, it just says the mayor, so
Yeah.
we'll make sure that there's a requirement that the council be notified.
So the item on the agenda, number 2, discussion and action on adopting the new boards and commission policy is something that we can do tonight, but we need to add that the F will be added for the library for the ordinance of the library. Is that- Would that,
You know, just with all the changes.
okay. Give me my,
Do you have them? Yeah. You want a motion on that?
yes.
Mayor, move that we approve the adoption of the new boards and commissions policy with the changes noted of record.
Second.
Motion's been made and second, all in favor. 1, 2, it is approved. And so now we're going to move into discussion and action on adoption of the ethics policy ordinance. And we had a couple of different discussions. Do you have all those listed? Do you want to, okay, go ahead.
So Jennifer, you have the one, you have the,
You want me to tell you which ones?
yeah,
I
if you
have?
don't mind, so everybody can hear it.
So for the actions for the ethics policy, we need to add, council should be aware of all complaints. Now, I do also have that note that it would be under 1.02.057C7, that it goes to, that anything that does not go to a ad hoc, it's going to go to the mayor and the city manager, and then the mayor forwards
Send it.
that to the council. So it's two different things. You'll get notified for any complaint. If it doesn't go anywhere, you'll still get notified. Take out on section 102.058 D1, take out C. And then we're going to change the 2 years, 5 years to 2 years to review. Add page numbers. If
That would be nice.
change the 3 days to convene to reasonable time. And then we're also in the nope, that's for the handbook, but that's it.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion with
Okay.
all those ideas.
Okay, Mayor, I move that we approve the ethics policy ordinance with the changes of record.
Second.
Motion's been made and second, all in favor. 1, 2, it is approved. The next item is discussion and action on adopting a standalone policy banning a video sharing application, TikTok, and other prohibited technologies from the all city-owned devices and networks over the Chinese Communist Party's ability to use the application for surveilling Texans.
Do you want to run through this real quick?
Do you
guys?
need him to discuss it? It's a
What are you going to
text.
do when the new administration says you can't ban it?
Mhm.
There's going to be a fight between the
Well,
feds and the state?
Unless the Chinese sell TikTok to Elon Musk, I'm not worried.
It's pretty self-explanatory, so I'll entertain a motion.
You ready for a
I'm
motion?
ready for a motion. It's pretty self.
Okay, Mayor, I make a motion that we adopt a standalone policy banning the video sharing application TikTok and other prohibited technologies for all city-owned devices and networks over the Chinese Communist Party ability to use the application for surveilling Texans.
I'll second that emotion.
Motion been made and second. All in favor?
Can I have one point of discussion before we vote?
Okay, yes.
I just a question. On the second page under 4B, it says the city may also prohibit any social media applications or services in addition to those specified by the governor. So is that new to the city? Are we adding that policy that the city, presumably the city manager can decide to ban any social media app?
That came out of this from the Department of Information Resources that was sent out by the state in September. I have this because I was the one that brought a lot of this forward.
Okay, so
To
to answer my question, please.
To answer your question, it's something the city has always been able to do.
Okay.
It's
That's
our
what I-
stuff. We
That's all I wanted to know is this is not new. We've always had the ability to ban anything. So we're just specifying TikTok. We already have the right to do this.
Right. Correct.
Okay.
But the state has required us to
State's
adopt the
required
policy.
That's
Yeah.
right. This is just a formality to comply with state law.
Correct.
All right. Thank you.
No, you're good. I don't forgot where I was.
Here,
Uh,
You got a motion in a second.
You got a motion in a
Oh,
second?
all approved? Okay, approved. Thank you. Otis, you might be up.
Otis, not up. Jason, thanks for making the trip as
Thank you,
always.
Jason.
Thank you.
Enjoy your ride back home and the sunset. We'll never forget.
Mayor, may I bring up a point that's flying from 30,000 feet, but in terms of, as we're talking about how our boards and commissions perform, and I don't know to what extent that each of these actually operate under either an independent vision or work plan. And if that is evaluate, if they've set a vision and a goal to accomplish certain things over a certain amount of time, is that measured and can that be reported to us so we know what's going on, within those? And we do get reports. But my bigger concern is, does it align with what we're developing as the city's vision itself? Are we all working towards the same goal, which is the overriding goal? If we decide, which we really don't have, that the city of Smithfield is going to become adopt a pro-growth yet managed growth objective as we move forward and develop the things that we're doing in the comprehensive plan. Do each of the boards and commissions also align with that, and are they trying to accomplish the same thing, or are they just operating independently? I throw that out for opinions of what's going on. I don't think I made sense trying to pull that together. I just don't know that we're all on the same page with what we're trying to do.
Questions already, we could put this on another agenda. I think
Okay,
since
I'd
we've
be
already
happy to
voted
do
in
that.
action, yeah.
And
We can-
it's a bigger issue, but it's more
Yes.
of alignment that we're all working towards the same end goal.
I will say, Councilmember Jameson, Jennifer has provided me in the past when I've asked for the charters for each of the boards and commissions. I think it's interesting to just get a copy of those and read those because they all are obviously unique to what they do.
Right.
But to your point, I do think that part of the comp plan process ought to be to look at boards and commissions to make sure when they do their recommendations for the comp plan, if there's recommendations for how to either better focus or streamline those, that probably be very appropriate for the comp plan.
When we establish a vision, a true vision for what we want to do over the next 3, 5, 10, 15 years, are all those organizations working towards the same goal, or are they just still out operating independently?
We'll move to the next item. Are you good? Presentation from Bevco Engineering Wastewater Treatment Facility.
Okay, Council Mayor, this one is on me because I told Mr. Chad Emmel from Befco that we're probably not going to get anywhere near his presentation until about 6:30 because y'all did a much more efficient job at reviewing this in person. So he's not here yet. But so you can either take a short bio break or we can talk about some of the things that have been done since this report was completed with respect to finding funding. What would you like to do? He's 15 minutes out, by the way.
You can, we'll talk about the funding. Yes, how you're going to establish that.
Okay, so if you remember the report, we're looking at about a $24 to $27 million bill in aggregate for expanding our wastewater treatment facilities. Some of that cost about 5 million or 4 million, excuse me, were for refurbishment of Gasly and Willows and doing a trunk line. If you remember the last presentation, I think in July. I've been able to leverage Hurricane Harvey funds. There's a program now that TDM and FEMA are putting out. It's called the DRRP, the Disaster Recovery Reallocation Program. All of the floods that we've had since 2015, 16, 17 Harvey, Ike, Dolly. Everyone submitted applications for funding assistance against those disasters, but not everyone utilized the funding. So this big chunk of money that's going back to the government and is going to be redistributed based upon a competitive score of the projects that you want to implement. Some of the projects that qualify are water and wastewater improvements. Interesting. So the biggest chunk of money is coming from Hurricane Harvey. I submitted 3 applications Monday to one, $4 million against Hurricane Harvey reallocated funds with a 10% match to give us the refurbishment and the repair of the Gasly and Willows plant, as well as completing the trunk line. The max award that's available is $20 million. And I've done a preliminary score. We're scoring a 64 out of 100. And that's, bless you, it's based on many factors. It is a competitive analysis and of that scoring. So you don't want to ask for 20 million because our score won't support that. Also, if we get 20 million, I got to find 2 million, 10% match for that. But the good news is there's a good chance talking to Langford and speaking to the people that I've been working with at Tatum. This is a reasonable project, to improve your wastewater and water systems.
Would you say trunk line, that's a new,
That was the
New
original
construction.
picture that he had,
Yeah, there was a trunk line that he was going to, what was it going from? Yeah, it's in the, it's trunk line number 1. And there'll be pictures later,
okay.
but yeah.
Yes, I saw an example. I went to a Bastrop Regional Business Summit yesterday, and it was very enlightening for me because they told the story of what happened when Elon Musk came in and decided where he wanted to locate Boring at SpaceX and now X, Twitter. And so they needed a trunk line, a wastewater line from up there. So it eventually, and I don't know how much Musk and his crew contributed to it, how much was done by the city of North County. But what it effectively did, I think it comes back down 969 and dumps into another trunk line and ends up going to the wastewater treatment plant just south of Bastrop where everything's handled. But that became a growth management tool so that corridor coming down 969 is now ripe for expansion because it's got wastewater lines on it. And to me, that's a tool that we can use as we try and get our arms around what's inevitably going to happen here. That's a tool for us to dictate or manage where our growth might be. And we're all concerned with that. And I saw during one of the comp plan meetings where it looks like the most likely areas for us to expand is going to be on the north and east side of 71, because that deals with the floodplains and available land and other things. So do we put a trunk line out there or an actual wastewater treatment facility out there, because this is where we want the growth to go, and it will, if you build it, they will come. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the trunk line that's being proposed is to give us a more capacity now versus in the future, and it's the least expensive of all the trunk lines we're going to need to support the growth with which you speak. So, and that's, do we have a look at that preliminary cost analysis? Is that, he may not have brought that.
And then here's
Yeah, but this was BEFCO's and LAN's recommendation. If you want the most bang for the buck, do your refurb, rehab, and the trunk line, and that'll get you over whatever hump, short-term hump, and short-term being 2 to 3 years versus 5 to 7. So that's what they recommended, and that's what I used as a basis for the application when I asked for the DRRP funding.
So the first thing we've got to do is Band-Aid, and the second thing is we do what's next in order to have an opportunity to manage that growth or dictate where it might go.
Yeah, and both require 10% match, so it's going to be interesting.
Robert, are there grants out there? Are there grants out there for?
Is this not working? Oh, I'm sorry. Would you like me to
There are
repeat
grants
that?
out there for matches.
Would you like me to repeat it? Okay, I actually will. I'd be happy to do that. We're talking about kind of a two-step to. Oh, I won't remember by then. Yes, ma'am. I'll be happy to discuss it with you off record. Yeah, and I'm sorry I wasn't speaking close enough to the microphone.
Okay, so that's one of the, as I say, three applications that I have submitted. The other two are for 2015, 2016 flood events. And those pay out a maximum of $2 million each. Again, we got the same score, 64. But I'm applying for street repairs and drainage on MLK. So 2 million for street and 2 million for drainage with a 10% match. These decisions are the competition. This is the pre-application. And if they like what you're doing, they'll invite you to participate formally. But this is one that we had to submit on our own. But I had a lot of consult with BEFCO and Langford about this program. So
And the onus will be on us to fund the match.
always, yeah. But if 200,000 get you 2 million, we can find it. Okay, that's one. This is like the path to 270. How do we get there? Yeah. Okay, little political humor there. Let me move on. So DRRP is one funding element. Another element we're looking at is the Texas Water Development Board, and they have a host of programs that we could be eligible for, but with them, the match is more. And most of these are loans, and there's some loan forgiveness, but it's a little more tedious to work with. Councilmember Meek has been meeting with us with, what's the gentleman's name? I'm sorry. With the Texas Water Development Board to go through some of the things we're eligible for, right? Paul Morales. Anyway, so there's opportunities there to apply for the larger amount. I'm also, as you know, looking and exploring impact fees. And that's a 9 to 12 month process. I think we all agree it's something we need to go for based upon, developer has to own some of this because it's expensive. Will require a impact fee commission. There's a whole process that I'm getting my hands wrapped around, and then we'll present that to y'all in the coming year. Okay. The last other things you could do would be a certificate of obligation or a bond election. Historically, bond elections get shot down like a dove in October because no one wants to pay more taxes. But it's not out of the realm of possibility. But a $20 million bond, it's going to be expensive, and that's today's dollars. What happens, 3 to 4 years when we really get to the point where we have to pull the trigger to start funding these projects.
Well, I think as a council, if we're all in agreement on the need for these things, then we can develop the package that appropriately educates the citizens about the needs and what the results would be, assuming that we are able to pass a bond of that size, or what the outcome would be if we don't. Because here's what we're going to get if we do it, and here's what we're going to not get if we don't, and we're going to be stuck with where we are now. And I think we can present that. I'm going to call it sell it, but if we believe in it, I think we have an opportunity to educate our citizens on. I'm certainly willing to do that.
One of the things I've, see about the comp plan after we've heard Jerry talk about it on several occasions, as they get to the end of it, one of the things that they do is go out and help us find grants to accomplish things like this. So if Langford has a long history of finding the money for different cities. So I think that's going to be something for us to look at. And I think that's within the realm of the next year when we get to that point.
Other options that we have for utilities are public improvement districts, PIDs, MUDs. So we have a lot of options. And fortunately, again, we're not anywhere near the trigger or 55% capacity. 75 is the trigger to start planning, 90 is the trigger to start building. So we're at about 55 in both plants, right, Otis? Okay. You got tomatoes growing out there again? Just kidding. Oh, okay.
Glow in the dark.
Yeah, how fast?
Robert, have we had any interested parties come in and ask us about that and ask us about capacity and ask us about our interest and willingness to do a PUD? Is that any conversation gotten that far?
You made a faux pas and I just can't get over it. Talk amongst yourselves. That really tickled me, man.
Somebody got to enlighten me. I'm a very common
No,
man.
it's PID. Don't even go through it.
It's a pit.
You said PUD.
We
It
have
could be a
PIDs
public,
and
I
PUDs.
just had a vision, whatever. Let's move on.
PIDs and PUDs are both things.
Yes. What was the question? I'm sorry. Oh, has there been any? Oh my God, what time is it? Come on, Chad. I'm dying here.
I might have to go watch the tape.
Yes, so,
You said you put them together.
it's just something that took, I don't even know what the hell happened, whatever. There has been some interest in folks coming in wanting to do large scale development and yeah, and at this point, they don't want to be known yet, but yeah, there's been inquiries. PID,
Anytime you need
PID,
us to
Public
go to
Improvement
executive
District.
session, we'd be willing to go back and hear what's going on.
Well, it's somebody you all know, but he just wants to keep it a little quiet right now until he figures out what he wants to do. 300 acres to the north, as you said. So.
Would that be a PID or a PUD?
It'd be a PID.
Yeah.
Is it a mid or a mud? Potato, potato. Chad, where
Okay,
are you,
let's
brother?
pull up the map and let's look for
It was-
300 acres.
Chad, save us.
Okay. What else? Wait, we can talk about wastewater. How's the wastewater plant, Otis? Good? Wonderful.
You don't need night lights with those growing tomatoes, do you? They just kind of light up everything for you?
Edward, did we get all the blowers? Edward? The blowers? Did we get the blowers and? Come to the microphone so people would wonder who I'm talking to in the back.
So where we are now is we've got the second blower fixed at Gasly now. It's leveled and wired and pumped in, so it's working. So we're switching back and forth. At Willows, we have 2 of the 3 pumps working. I'm just trying to find some money how we're going to fix the 3rd pump, but we have 2 of them that are working, that's what we were supposed to have, two working at all times. So I don't know where we're going to go with that 3rd one yet. It's
Well,
a
we're
lot
gonna
of
wait
money.
for the DRRP funding to be released in 3 to 6 months. And the requirement for that particular reallocation is you have to finish the project within 2 years. So,
Okay.
Get our stuff fixed, the trunk line in and add a little capacity. I did go back and take a look at, if you remember Chad's report, that there was some concentrations at Gasly that didn't make sense. To that point, I visited with Bone Spirits and they have nothing that they put down the drain that would cause that. I met with Mixology, same thing. They have nothing. Those are businesses that are on the Gasly line. And they have nothing that they clean their tanks or their process with. So I've got to find out where else it may be coming from. And of course, in the locker plant, when they slaughter, that comes over and messes with our bugs a little bit, but not to the level that Chad was expressing. Yeah.
That is correct.
When that gets fixed, how much capacity does it bring back online?
Well, it does. So what's supposed to happen is at Willows, we're supposed to always have 2 blowers blowing at all time and then 1 on rest. And every 4 months, we're supposed to go through and we change blower 1 and 2 that's been going for 4 months. We change it to 2 and 3 blowing for 4 months. And then we change it after 4 months to 3 and 1 blow so that every blower has a set day of 4 months. Right
So
now,
on
we
an
don't have
addition
that.
of capacity is when two of them aren't working, we have a reduction.
That's correct. That's correct. So right now we have 2 blowers blowing at 100% capacity at all time. So we're never letting rest. And that's not good. And that's what we do at Gasly. Gasly only needs to have 1 running. So it runs every 4 months and then we switch it to the second one. Back and forth. Correct? Correct. See? It's like power lines.
Thank you, Edward.
Here's a visual of our trunk line inspections.
There we go.
Or, that he'll be showing with the build in. The 3 different ones coming out of Willows.
Blue. Good job. Didn't know I was up there.
I got you, girl.
Some of that off of Gasly, won't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Loop Road area. This is Willows. The range. Loop Road. Just take the center point exit and you get out there. You ever been to the wastewater plant? Need to do it.
We need to have a tour.
Do the tour.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you can do that with a quorum. Have to figure that out.
Take separate,
Y'all
separate
come on, have
cars.
some tomatoes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this is cooking.
It's fascinating, really. I mean, to think that it goes in this way and it comes out this way.
So the blue line up top to the left where it says sewer shed number 1, that is Texaco?
That's
No, that connects to River Bend and the bore beneath the river.
right. Yeah.
You're late.
Thank you.
I got you, man.
Man,
Don't worry.
I'm dying up here like a unknown comic. I should put a bag on.
My apologies.
No,
Oh.
no, I've already said taking blame. I told you to come a little later. But
What you looking for?
It's going like this.
Clearly, the first one went well. Hopefully, this will go equally well.
So that's River Bend.
first of all, very good job on the final report.
First cut.
A lot of data.
That's
Presented well and concise, so thank you
Quite welcome.
very much. This is Chad Immel, by the way, from BEFCO.
Wow. Oh, no. A long time. Robert was telling us
Way too
so,
long.
so
It was
it's
bad.
okay. It got really bad for a minute.
About 20 minutes.
And you realize that
Next item on the agenda, presentation from Bevco Engineering Wastewater Treatment Facility Expansion Study Final Report. Take it away.
Good evening. And again, Chad Amel, Befco Engineering. Sorry to keep you guys waiting. Was kind of just going through it myself again, refamiliarizing myself. Obviously, we did give a council presentation back in July on the 10th. So I'm not going to necessarily go through what I gave you guys in finite detail like we did the first time around, kind of hit the highlights, and then we'll really get down to what is probably the looming issue, which is what's priority and how much does it cost, right? So we'll kind of run through this. I'll hit highlights as we go. I'll show some exhibits along the way. Again, all of these, for the most part, you guys have seen. They were also in the report, so there's really nothing that you're going to see tonight that you, if you've looked at the report, and of course, we're at the first council workshop, there's nothing necessarily new here. The things that have probably changed from the first time we had the council workshop is we fine tune the kind of the priorities and the costs. Other than that, there's not a lot of changes since then. So again, kind of just an overall of what the study was an evaluation of the existing systems metrics. So in other words, what the wastewater treatment plants, what their actual average daily flow rates are today, and the average daily flow per home, or an LUE, a wet weather peaking factor. So establishing those things so that the city has something moving forward. An evaluation of the existing infrastructure, so the condition of each wastewater treatment plant, and then also known collection system issues. We also looked at the development and assumptions along with those. So persons per household, the estimated 30-year growth rate was established. And then we created a development map and assumed development densities. We also identified future infrastructure needs. So where lines may need to be expanded, lift stations that might need attention, and also wastewater treatment plant maintenance and expansion needs. And then finally, try to figure out where those triggers are. When do we need to make those improvements? What the maintenance recommendations are, both in the short term and potentially in the long term, and then try to prioritize all those things and come up with a cost estimate. So breaking down each one of those components, we looked at each wastewater treatment plant from roughly 2018 to I think it was October of 23, and looked at that data to kind of compare it to TCEQ. So for Willow wastewater treatment plant, the permit capacity is 0.3 MGD, million gallons per day. The actual capacity is that. And when I say actual capacity, I mean, LAN, who is our subconsultant, looked at the actual plant's components and whether or not they were actually sized appropriately and can actually handle the permanent capacity that TCEQ believes there is. Okay. So Willow wastewater treatment, Willow wastewater treatment plant can handle the capacity that it is permitted with TCEQ. Today, the actual average daily flow that it's seeing is 0.141 MGD, which is roughly 47% of its permitted capacity, and has an availability of additional connections, or LUEs, of roughly 700. Okay, so that's how many more you could put on there before we run out. Okay. Gasly, on the other hand, so Gasly here in town is permitted with TCEQ at 0.5 MGD, so 500,000 gallons per day. Unfortunately, though, it has some issues with the way that the plant is had been constructed. It has limitations with its clarifier. There's also some other issues that we may or may not get into the details, but ultimately, it can really only handle 243,000 gallons per day. So that's what, if you start exceeding that, then you have to worry about breaking the permitted limits of discharge. And I don't mean by gallons per day, because TCEQ believes that you can handle 500,000 gallons, but rather the constituent that's leaving the water when they start doing the testing, the likelihood of breaking those permitted limits, because the permit has both a gallons per day, and it also has different constituents that can be in the water as it leaves. And the city does testing for those things along the way. And once they reach roughly what we assume to be about 243,000 gallons per day, you're going to start seeing constituents in the water that will break some of those other TCEQ limits in the permit. Absolutely.
So it's TCEQ, Gasly is permitted for 500,000 gallons a day per TCEQ, but we're producing about half of that.
Well, we're producing, we're at 162,000 gallons per day. That's your actual flow that we're seeing. The 243, that's kind of how much the plant could actually process, would be the best way to say it.
So is the goal to get us back up to the 500,000 gallons per day?
What you'll see as we go through this is ultimately, yes, at some point in the future, but given the recommendations that we provide, You won't need to do that in the next 30 years. Okay, so with some of the changes of moving, if you will, in some ways, moving some sewer around and sending it over to Willow instead, which you're going to have to expand pretty much no matter what. We can keep Gasly, which kind of has a limited footprint anyway. We can keep Gasly from needing expansion. Now, on the other hand, it does need a lot of TLC. It needs a lot of maintenance to it.
Okay,
So
okay.
your money is better spent maintaining it than expanding it.
I understand. Thank you.
So it remains capped at 162 then?
It's capped at as far as TCEQ is concerned, it's capped at 500. Operationally, you're capped at 243,000. Again,
But we're producing 162 and we can't get it to 243.
you can take it up to 243.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. Presently,
And you're going to tell us what it would do to get to the 243.
Well, as you grow and as the city grows and more sewer goes to it, you could take it up to the 243.
What, and the line of questioning is getting to what our true capacity is to handle the future growth.
And your future capacity with it and doing the maintenance will be that 240.
Okay, so we have the room to,
Correct. To
Take-
get up to 243. That's exactly right.
As long as we make those improvements in the maintenance, correct?
Right.
That we're,
Yes. I mean, yeah, that
okay,
to just keep it functioning.
gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Part of one of the other, let's see, well, one of the other things that LAN looked at was sewage strength. Okay, so your wastewater treatment plants for a municipality are assumed to have a certain sewage strength, which is effectively, think about a home, right? Your home is what they expect it to be treating. So if you get industrial users that are releasing stronger sewage, you can also run into issues. And again, that 243 number then starts ticking down even further because you start running into the ability for that plant to process that stronger strength sewage. That makes sense? So what we've found is that there are someone in the city is releasing stronger sewer than the plant is designed to handle. It can handle it as of right now, so far as we know, depending on how often those stronger sewages are coming through the plant. But that's something that the city, you guys do have a pre-treatment ordinance already on the books. It needs to it would be wise to try to track down who that industrial user or users might be and enforce the ordinance on them. So a common pre-treatment that you would see on a commercial or industrial user would something like a restaurant, right? A restaurant has a grease trap. A grease trap is a type of pre-treatment unit. So that's just one example. So if you don't track down these commercial users or industrial users that are linked into your sewer system, there's going to be some costly upgrades that'll need to be made at the treatment plant as well to keep it within permit limits. So.
and Detective Tamble is hard at work trying to find out where that is.
Yeah, I briefed them on the fact that we looked at the locker plant for the food locker, the meat packing plant, distillery and mixology. I did verify that mixology puts nothing down the drain that's a chemical.
Okay.
So I'm at a loss as to where this is coming from.
Yeah, and I mean, the best thing we could do, Robert, is maybe we could sit down, Bethco and city staff and come up with a testing regimen, right? We could do a control, basically coming in at the plant, taking a sample there. At the same time, we take a sample, if you will, upstream at or two samples at a junction, right? Where we have two confluences of major contributors, figure out, okay, well, it's either A or B. Where's it coming from? A, okay, we know it's somebody upstream on this line. And of course, you'd have your control to make sure that in case A and B both came back as negative, well, do we have a constituent actually coming in right now or not at the control at the plant? So I'm not saying it's going to be a quick endeavor nor necessarily a cheap one when it comes to paying for the testing of those samples, but like you, I don't know how else you would track it down. So. Okay, so one of the other things that we did was try to figure out for Smithville specifically, what is the average daily flow of a given home? Okay, and we did this through the magic of numbers, so to speak, which is looking at the actual flow that's coming into the plant, how many connections were on each plant, taking out your big water users, so your basically your commercial users, and trying to, if you will, dumb it down to where we're only looking at the houses that were coming into each plant. Basically, what we found is as low as 135 gallons per day. And we don't want to just take that number and run with it. That would be a bad decision on our part, especially engineers. We like to be conservative, I'll be honest. We don't want to do that. Okay, we want to make sure that we give ourselves some leeway. So what we looked at is TCEQ kind of has some guidelines as well. They basically say that you're supposed to think of a house or a person as producing 75 to 100 gallons per day. So what we found based on census data is that Smithville's around 2.5 persons per household. So if you multiply that out, I think the low end at 75 gallons per person, that's just over 187, I think it's 187.5 gallons per house. So what we ultimately did after just talking with city staff is elected to go with 185 gallons per day per connection or per home, okay? We extrapolate that out to businesses, right? So if you have a apartment complex, okay, they produce a certain number of connections. A industrial user would produce a certain number of connections, and all that's important because it helps ascertain how much flow is going to come from this development and that development and this house, this subdivision, and so on and so forth. So it helps you size lines and think about the impact of a potential development will have not only on the collection system, not only your lift station, but also on your wastewater treatment plant. And if the city were ever to elect to investigate impact fees, the impact fees could be tied to how many connections that particular business or subdivision or whatever it may be, development would bring forward, right? So a connection count could be part of the calculation. Any questions there? Okay. One last kind of factor there is a peaking factor. So when we talk about that 185 gallons per day, that's kind of an average, right? That's if we look at an entire month, divide it by 30, what was the average, right? But that's not really how we work in society. We're at home at certain hours of the day. We're flushing toilets, for washing clothes. We're taking showers in the evening or in the morning. So those are what we call a peak, right? And then we also have rain. So what happens when it's raining outside? And as we know, our infrastructure gets aged, we take in water. So we have to factor that in because ultimately it goes through our collection system, lift stations, and wastewater treatment plants. So ultimately what we looked at is a peaking factor of 4. So again, we're multiplying that on top of what we believe to be the average. And that's the type of thing that we have to size the collection, all the systems for, okay? And that's basically a TCEQ standard, more or less. We're not deviating from that very much, especially considering we're using what we believe is a fairly good number for the average daily flow per connection. Okay, so LAN, as I pointed out, which was our subconsultant, we're looking at each wastewater treatment plant and evaluated their conditions. Willow, out on the east side of town, was in fairly good condition. Needs a few maintenance and upgrades that could be handled. Again, it's doing well as far as its capacity. Couple minor things and some, if you will, almost wish list things that the city staff would like to have to both reduce operational costs. So the sludge drying beds are a point of contention for city staff. It costs a lot of money. It's not very efficient, things that could be improved upon. So, but overall, I mean, there's things that need to be maintained there, but overall it's in fairly good operating condition. Gasley, on the other hand, as I mentioned previously, is kind of in a state of disrepair. The lift station is more or less on its deathbed. It needs to be renovated. It's kind of falling apart, as well as the blower system. And that basically a wastewater treatment plant uses air. Okay, it feeds the bugs that then eat the sewage and bring down the constituents in the sewage. So quite a few things that need repair in Gasley there. As far as some of the lift stations in town, Machuca is one of your main lift stations. And it's got some, it's a quirky lift station, I guess would be the way that we would look at it as engineers. It's not built the way we would build it today. Some oddities of as far as where it's constructed, how it was constructed. So if we had our way, we would look at trying to either doing some major renovations to it or possibly even relocate it because of where it's located. It's again, just not in a great spot. However, as you'll see later, not necessarily a very high priority as it is functional as is. So
Where's that located, please?
excellent question. Let's see. On second between Bishop and part of, I guess that now it might even be a good time, as far as the known collection system issues, this map has been generated by BEFCO kind of over the years and then refined as part of this study. Kind of shows, you can see the large bubbled areas there. That's where we know some of the system was rebuilt or built. So we put age of infrastructure together on this, identifies where the various lift stations are, and also identifies areas that the city has said, hey, we need to look at these areas. We've got some old clay lines, for instance, that are collapsing. Of course, that's in your kind of your old town sections, right? And as far as kind of skipping ahead, one of our recommendations is that the city kind of try to look at annually chipping away at this, right? It's not going to be something that the city can afford to do all in one blush. It's going to be something that you can chip away at and possibly even use some grant funds through it, say maybe the CDBG, for instance, to chip away at those things. So,
Robert, would the funding we're seeking cover any of these old lines or just the plants themselves?
The plants themselves plus the rehab and refurb at Gasly and a trunk line. That's what the trunk line number 1 is what I'm shooting for. Yes.
So part of the study, as I mentioned earlier, was establishing a growth rate for the city, and that becomes important to try to project when all this is going to occur. So we looked at a number of things: the Texas Comptroller's Office, the U.S. Census Bureau, Texas Demographic Center, and the Texas Water Development Board, and ultimately came up with what we believe to be a fairly conservative number of 2.8% year-over-year growth. Okay, so where we utilize that, and I know it's just a batch of numbers that are up here, but we looked at the growth rate impact on each wastewater treatment plant, trying to project when are you going to run out of capacity? And then of course we looked at each bar here. Each one of these is a separate scenario that we looked at along the way. That again is kind of moving some things around. We looked at moving Machuca Lift Station, which once actually did come over to Gasly. We looked at it and currently is going over to Willow. We looked at bringing it back over to Gasly to free up capacity in Willow. Was one of the options we looked at. We also looked at shifting basically all of the sewer shed drainage area up north of the river, moving it over to Willow. And that's actually one of our recommendations. And again, that's to save money because the timing of having to do multiple wastewater treatment plant upgrades, expansions to your collection system, all of those things start to factor in on what makes sense and when. So
You're using 2.8% population growth?
correct.
That ain't it.
In that you think it's higher or lower?
Well, I mean, you take a look at this summit that I went to yesterday, Bastrop's going to grow by 40% in the next 4 years. And so when it hits, it hits.
You're absolutely right. And
And
that's the tough part to project.
Yeah.
No doubt. I mean, I can dive into a little bit. I mean, for Bastrop County, from 2010 to 2019, it's grown 28.5% when the rest of the state's only grown 15%. So, but we know where that that's occurring, right? That's a little bit further towards Austin is where it's happening. Bastrop is certainly growing at a quick clip. Smithville over that same window, that 10-year window, from 2010 to 2020 has only grown 2.8% actually right now. Right. Over that's a 10-year window. And so we're saying 2.8 year over year. So what that would equate to, okay, the Texas Water Development Board assumes Bastrop County is going to grow by 128% by 2050, which is that 2.8%. So to look at it from a population standpoint, by 2030 for Smithville, that would be 5,170 folks. By 2040, you're looking at 6,800. And by 2055, you're looking at over 10,000 folks. So it really starts to build on itself when you have, when you're going by a percent.
But as you compound the 2.8.
Yeah, the challenge is, to your point, much like wastewater, peak matters. And so when you have a low base, a percentage is a very, very small absolute. So the 2.8%, if you assume we have 4,000 people in the city today, just for round numbers, 2.8% is 112 people. So that's 1 year's worth of projected growth. The enclave subdivision has 112 or 113 lots. If a high volume production builder like a DR or Lennar or somebody like that goes in there, which is likely to happen, and you have an average of your 2.5, they blow through those 112 lots in 15 months. 112 times 2.5 is twice what your growth rate is.
Right.
So because we have some current capacity, we can handle a little bit of that at the front end, but because it takes so long to plan and finance and construct this stuff, I think it's very important, if you're going to do a 10 or a 15 or 20-year projection, to use a much higher percentage rate in the first few years until your base gets higher. And I'm not suggesting you're wrong, but
to your point, actually.
Yeah.
So to your point, what we actually did is Robert's got about, if I remember remember some of these numbers off the top of my head, but I think it's 650 LUE.
we've got some capacity today.
That the city has kind of already allocated to developers.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
that's true.
Of those 650, what I've done in my calculation is over the next 5 years, I put all 650 in the next 5 years. And I'm growing it by 2.8%. So in essence, I am trying at least to factor in that there's current developments that are already exploring development and factoring those in on the early onset.
Okay.
But to your point.
No. That's good to know. So you're doing the 2.8 on top of the time horizon that's going to use the committed one.
Right.
Okay,
I'm
that
taking the
helps a lot.
650 and saying, okay,
But
those could
Robert,
happen
we
over the next-
cap out at 760 is what we got? 770,
700 LUEs left is what he said, but that was at Willows or Gasly? Yeah, Willow, yeah.
Can I?
Got 650 already counted into that?
No.
650 doesn't go all the way to Gasly. It's split amongst other, but it's mostly Willows is where
Yeah,
the
that-
extra capacity.
Yeah, the 700.
We've committed.
Yeah.
The exception is Domain Industries,
Mhm.
200 LUEs, Riverside Resources.
That they sold to the new guy?
Yeah, to
Yeah.
Glenn Sinnott. Yeah,
So let me ask a question, and I know this has been covered before because we've been several presentations, and it goes to a point that Councilmember Meeks made, which is you've got Gasly, which is being basically kind of capped out. We're just saying we're going to do whatever's necessary to keep its capacity kind of where it is and push all the growth and the new stuff to Willow going forward. There's two important things. One is just capacity. The other is distribution. So when we're talking about this $24 to $27 million and how we're putting in lines, is this going to create the distribution system to support that philosophy of pushing all the treatment to
Yes.
Willow?
The numbers that were put in the report
Okay.
support.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. All the cost estimates that were provided get you past this 30-year horizon and beyond, frankly. But,
Targeting what capacity?
so, and we'll get into it more. But basically what we did is created a map, a development map, and one of them is over there on the right. We looked at, in discussion with the city, our city staff, we looked at a certain development window, if you will. How far out does the city really want to think about capturing development, right? So we looked at two different areas. North of the river. Here, kind of south of the river, and more or less on both sides of. So those are the areas that you see in the pink are kind of your undeveloped areas. Okay, areas in yellow are developed or kind of, I think they have accounted for LUE counts already. So the infrastructure that we looked at sizing covers the complete build out of these areas.
That's what I'm asking.
Okay. However, at the same time, the complete build out of these areas will not be covered by the plant expansions that are in this report because that, in theory, won't occur during the 30-year horizon that we studied.
And that build out assumes the 4 LUE per acre assumption.
There's a number of assumptions. That's the chief if we don't know
Right.
what's coming.
Okay. Yeah. For something that hadn't been identified for a land use, you use that as your place marker. Yeah.
So yeah, y'all transition right into the right thing. So that was kind of the next talking point anyway, is the development maps that we had put together. And there's a litany of assumptions that are put into this, okay? Because not only are we assuming a 4 LUE per acre, which is a large assumption in itself, but we try to, if you read through the report, you'll see that we kind of try to qualify that seems to be a pretty good number for you guys based on existing developments that are around town. And the idea is, you know, you're going to get one development that might be, who knows, 30 LUE per acre, a fancy restaurant, a big restaurant, for instance, is a big water user. Whereas you may get a large lot subdivision that would have low LUE per acre. So the idea is that we're not going to hit 4.0 on the nose. We just want to be close. At the same time, we don't want to be low. We want to be a little conservative, right? So, you know, again,
But if you bring in 1, 2, or 300 unit apartment complex sitting on 5 acres, then
they're a high user.
we've blown it
Well,
through the.
at the end of the day, you hope that there's an average that occurs, because if you look at some of the subdivision, okay, subdivision users or an industrial user, typically industrial users are frankly low. So they cover a large footprint, but they don't use much water a lot of times.
Spread out, average out.
Right, so it spreads the average out on the other end.
Well, they use a lot of land and his assumption is based on a per acre metric. So, yeah.
So basically what we did is we tabulated, right, all of these future developments and existing developments, and now started to break it into, okay, where do those things go, right? Both existing infrastructure and potential future infrastructure. So that's where we get into the trunk lines, right? We don't get down into the 6-inch line. We're not worried about small lines. We're worried about the big lines. Big infrastructure. Again, on the north side, you have this is 71 here, okay, 230. Currently, there's a lift station of the Jimmy Anderson facility, right? They have a lift station in Force Main, comes all the way down, goes back to the American Legion, underneath the river, dumps in on the north side of town, goes to the south of the river, and makes. Ultimately, this trunk line 4 is one of our recommendations. It's a line you don't have. Which limits how much this can really develop. You can only put so much. So this is one of the larger expenditures, and the reality is this trigger depends on what the city would like to do from the development side. Spur development.
If you want to spur development in that area.
In this area, right. So, but it's also a large expenditure. The idea would be to put a gravity line, that's what this line would be, a gravity line down here to the American Legion Hall, put in a brand new lift station, okay? And our recommendation is actually this blue dash line here, take it across the river, across 71, takes the Willow, severs the tie to gas. That's a lot of development that occurs.
So the area in the top right quadrant, how is that serviced?
So this goes to what we call trunk line 6. This line is already existed. This is what that's what did this was EDA funds.
Oh, yeah, 17. Yeah, 15, 17.
Down to this lift station again that we designed and pumps over. This line and this lift station as designed to handle.
Okay, so that quadrant up there, if, I mean, logically and geographically and floodplains and everything, it seems to say that we're going to end up pushing in that direction. That's my opinion, but it's kind of what I've been picking up. Do you agree with that? So that's, we got to make sure that that's taken care of.
Right, so, and there is more land here, but we tried to use our engineering judgment, our development experience to say, hey, you can only recover so much floodplain. So we try to use that assumption. But, you know, these are large tracts, right? This is one track. That track will sell to a major track home builder.
So do we have or need to have a trunk line up there?
No, well, two here, we're in place. So on this side of 71, we're already in place. So if this development were to occur, somebody's gonna have 487.
That's what I'm talking about.
Generally speaking, that's gonna fall on more of your developers, but as far as financial costs.
Pids and puds.
Then as far as kind of south of the river, we have 3 different, what I call sewer sheds, and those sewer sheds are tied to the major trunk line. So again, there's the river, there's 71, there's 230. Okay. So sewer shed number 1, this trunk line is in place, although we would make some changes to it. The problem with this line, this lift station, the one we just referred to, we actually have that lift station choked back. Okay. We're not using it to its full capabilities. And the reason we're doing that, if we unleashed what it's actually capable of, we'd have water shooting out of these manholes. Okay. Because the line that's there just isn't large enough. So one of the recommendations we have is to upsize this trunk line here and actually cut straight up the Willow. And that will free you up both here and north of the river in the area that we just discussed. All that area we did free up. Okay. So again, this trunk line's happening. This lift station's happening. So I keep turning that lift station up because this line can't handle it. Hence why this line is one of the projects that same thing. So now we've got this area here. It's all coming to trunk line A. Two. This line, as it stands today, we already been talking with city staff, has experienced issues in the past when it rains. Okay. And what's happening there is you've got a couple of lift stations. You have the Machuca lift station, what we talked about earlier, and the Faulkner lift station that both come into that line roughly in the same location. So when it rains, you're at home, everybody's taking a shower, you've got that peak occurring, right? Both of those lift stations are turning on at the same time, pumping into that line. The line's not big enough. And what you find is that you've got some bubbling occurring at those manholes. And again, that's just simply the lines not able to handle all of the development that's occurred. So again, the improvements that we talk about for line 2 and line 3 is just this short segment. That line's the piece. Those are all 3 trunk lines that we recommend being upsized as funds are available. The last section that we had was trunk line 5, which was the line that takes the force main here that goes underneath the river on the north side. Purple line. Okay. This line, if we were to have this developed, okay, we take this lift station instead of taking it to Willow, we kept going underneath the river. We'd have to replace all that line, all those alleys, city streets, very expensive endeavor. It's one reason. So if we build trunk line 4 in this lift station, take it over to Willow, we won't have to keep this line stay back. Outside maintenance. Or just need to replace the infrastructure because of age. It doesn't need to be upsized. Okay, well. So this is actually a page directly out of the report. So what we're trying to do is come up with a prioritization table. So Gates basically came up with three different priorities. We had immediate and critical, talking about TC violations, have occurred in the past. Potential public safety concerns and risk-based imminent failure, something they will think are really important. Call somebody on the weekend and say, hey,
Where do we find that table in here?
The last general section. All the very, very back of that.
101?
Page 101.
Hey, Robert, what are our TCEQ violations entail? Are they monetary or are there suspensions or what do the
Well, I didn't know-
violations entail?
They vary. Some are administrative, some are financial. We haven't had a financial one in quite some time, correct? Yeah. Typically, it's didn't submit a report on time. The sample wasn't gotten to the lab with a certain, in the time frame 24 hours. Otis, you. Yeah. Yeah. Or to Chad's point, one of the things that's happened back in Harvey, we had someone report us that the very thing that happened, you had 20 inches of rain, everyone at home, and we percolated through the manholes and we got reported and we got popped for that. So.
And some of what I say here, when I say TCEQ violations is, I'll give you an example at Faulkner Lift Station. We can't, I've tried to track down when it was built and I was unsuccessful. But according to today's design standards, it's not up to snuff. So is it an actual violation? Somewhat debatable. It's operating, it's been operating, it's functional, but if I rebuild it today, it won't look like it does right now. Does that make sense? So although, we have Faulkner Lift Station kind of in the second priority, so it's not meeting current TCEQ standards as an example of one. So again, priority one is your immediate and critical. Number two is kind of within 5 years. Okay, that's what we would in a perfect world like to see or even need to see, which is you're nearing the end of its useful service life or it's not meeting TCEQ standards. And then finally, we have kind of number three priority, our lowest priority, which is kind of development, growth dependent, financing dependent. That could change, right? It could go from 3 and jump all the way up to 1 if you have the right type of development that occurs. But long term, these are what you want to kind of look at. So it spurs economic growth. Maybe it expands the capacity that would be required, increases safety, and reduces O&M cost. So a litany of things that third bullet point can handle. So now diving into what priority number one would be. Even though we have Machuca Lift Station up at the top, all we're talking about is replacing a faulty pump. And I believe that may have already been accomplished since the report. What that was is Machuca Lift Station should have 2 operational pumps in it. At the time that it was inspected during the report phase, it only had 1. And I think we were getting that worked on. So the ones that are to me the most important are the next ones. Okay, so you have the Gasly Lift Station rehabilitation and Gasly wastewater treatment plant rehabilitation. And again, there's a litany of things with the wastewater treatment plant that needs to kind of get renovated. So all in all, between the lift station and the rehab, you're looking at roughly $2 million, right, at Gasly. Willow, as I mentioned earlier, has some demons in it as well, some gremlins. So if you took care of those gremlins, you'd be somewhere in the order of just shy of 400,000, 385. And bear in mind, when you're looking at these numbers, we've got a decent contingency in there, I'll be honest. Okay. That was purposeful because this is in what we consider today dollars. Well, we all kind of know what's happened over the last, say, 5 years. Okay. We've had quite a bit of inflation. To give you an example, BEFCO put together some cost estimates for different grant projects back in 2017. As we all know, it takes a while for those grant projects to actually hit the ground and get into design and under construction. And some of those budgets were just flat out blown away. Some of the construction numbers that we put in there were almost doubled when we actually went to construction. So we have a 30% contingency in here, but it's in today's dollars. If these numbers aren't going to be good 5 years, 10 years, your guess is as good as mine. Well, we always like to say it's in today's dollars. You can do the time value of money and try to guesstimate what that would be, but we opted to stay away from that trap in the report. And then finally, in the priority number 1, we have the trunk lines 1, 2, and 3 that we discussed earlier. So that's really everything on the south side of the river, your major lines. And again, one would allow you to turn up the 71 lift station, and 2 and 3 again would allow for additional development here on the south side, as well as capacity wise. When it's raining, when everybody's at home, when that peak, you do risk a TCEQ violation. So priority number 2, now you're looking at over at the Willow Wastewater Treatment Plant. We talked about the drying bed situation. Operationally, it would be supreme help if they were able to change out the system there. And there's options available. The 118 isn't the gospel. There's different ways to do it. It's just the dollar figure we opted to run with there. You could do a roll-off dumpster dewatering system that some of our other clients use. Ultimately, it's not when you expand and you start getting a bigger plant, that's not going to be a system that you want to use long-term, but it would be good probably for what you have today.
If you back up to priority number 1 on the right-hand side, then we're looking at 8.151.
Yes, sir. That's all in, right? So that's your contingencies, that's engineering, and that's construction costs.
Need.
Correct. That's more of if I could pull the trigger tomorrow, we would.
And that's a 3 to 5 year program.
Yes. Like I said, if I could pull the trigger tomorrow, you would, simply put. So the next, your within 5 years is really your priority number 2 here. So you'll see under number 2, you also have the Gasly Wastewater Treatment Plant pre-treatment unit. Okay, that's the one we kind of talked about a little bit earlier. If you're able to find the users in town that are, putting out stronger sewage than they should without pre-treatment, this line item goes away. That 2.37 goes away because you wouldn't need it. Does that make sense? And there's the Faulkner lift station replacement. Again, maybe that'd be a prime candidate for like a CDBG project or something of that along those lines. Something, maintaining your system. And then priority number 3. So this is where we're going to start seeing some things. So the Willow Wastewater Treatment Plant expansion, somewhere, I think what the projection shows is 2039 is what we project that you're going to run out of. You're going to have to be under construction over at Willow to do the expansion based on the growth rate. And obviously there's plenty of things in there that could alter that. Excuse me, 2030, not 2039, 2030. So that's your, in between after 5 years, but you're going to be already starting to plan that. So obviously that's a big financial hardship. You're looking at $16+ million.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
In your experience, I know we see increasingly in-city MUDs being done by large-scale developers, and there's certainly large-scale pieces of property along 71 between Bastrop and Smithville and even on to LaGrange. I think Elgin may be doing one now. There's a couple in the region where they're negotiating with developers to install the MUD or the treatment facilities. And then once the development reaches a certain point, there's a pre-sale agreement with the city. So the city's investing in it with already paying customers. Have you seen any of that? And if so, if someone came and bought 300 or 400 or 500 acres on 71 and wanted to do their own facility, could they tap into the line and could we handle all of that?
So you would be, well, typically when you have my experience, mind you, this was back early in my career when I was in Houston. So I am familiar with
A great
MUDs,
place to have learned.
or things. Back then, at least, the general rule that I was made aware of was 500 acres. You needed 500 acres to make a MUD viable. Okay. And what I mean by viable is, the developer puts up all this money up front to build all this infrastructure, but he has to put roofs down on the ground because there's a MUD tax, right? And that MUD tax is what ultimately pays him back. That's why he's doing it. He wants the MUD tax to pay back all of his investment. So you have financial advisors incorporated into a MUD, and that financial advisor has to prove to the state of Texas that that MUD is going to be viable within a certain time period. Otherwise, you end up with situations, and there are some even in close by as Colorado County, where you have more or less a failed MUD district, meaning they tried to start a MUD, they didn't put enough houses down because people just weren't buying them, and the MUD district basically fell on its face. The developer turned belly up because he never got paid back, right? So it's part of the state's responsibility for a developer that comes to them proposing a MUD district to prove, yes, this is viable based on the projections that they're showing. Having said that, most MUDs would be looking at probably putting in their own package plant for wastewater treatment. You're next to the river, or potentially would be next to the river, so that'd be a pretty good candidate as far as an outfall location. So from a sewer standpoint, at least, the likelihood that they would have their own plant is high. So, in the future, they're going to likely have a lift station right there at their treatment plant. If the city were to capture, if you will, and dissolve the MUD, it's possible that lift station could be redirected to the city's own wastewater treatment plant, or the city could take over the wastewater.
Yeah, and really, this is just speculation. But when you have large tracts of land, the city could be proactive as a partner and solve the problem you spoke to, which is the city negotiates with a developer who wants to do that. The developer capitalizes it. They come up with the $25 or $30 million. We enter into a contract to buy the thing from them once there's a certain number of rooftops. The citizens of Smithville don't get stuck with kind of making a big investment on the come. They don't have to make the investment until there's paying customers in place. It's just a strategy that we should think about in the future. When we have large pieces of land that are conducive to MUDs, developers, they just want to be paid back that infrastructure cost. And they would much rather have it be paid back in one lump sum from a city than to have to go to a bond issuer and issue them in $5 million increments or $10 million increments as they develop out. So,
and even MUD districts, I mean, they can develop potentially faster than you
Absolutely.
would through a city process. And I would say, at least in my opinion, and it's just that, I would think your Bastrop area is probably more primed for it currently. But you guys probably aren't far away, quite, geographically.
Well, we're a prime candidate because we don't have the wastewater right now. So that's a way to solve for the wastewater.
Needless
problem.
Bastrop.
Yeah. Well, that's true.
So Tom, if that hypothetical MUD is within the if that hypothetical MUD were within the ETJ, then we've got annexation opportunities.
Yeah, it's
So
just a tool. It's
plan
just a
like
tool or a
this-
strategy that the city manager could use as part of economic development. If you hear or know, because he alluded earlier to landowners that have large pieces of property. One of the strategies would be to talk to those landowners about going and putting the mud in. The city supports that approval process with the legislature, potentially enters into a contract to buy the infrastructure from them once there's a certain number of hookups and verified revenue. We get what we want. We make them oversize the facility. So we end up buying it. The citizens of Smithfield don't have to fork over the money until there's revenue coming in. It's just a tool. I mean, I'm
Another
not
tool in the
suggesting.
economic
It's a
development
tool in
toolkit,
economic development. It's a
and
tool
that
that the
Robert
city
can use to
manager has
negotiate
as he's
the-
talking to large landowners or developers come to town and say, hey, I want to build a subdivision here. One of the things to think about is if you're going to do a large scale mixed use or predominantly single family, would you consider doing a MUD where the city enters into a contract to purchase the facility from you once it generates a certain number of income? It's just a strategy.
I like it.
Okay, so I think, what else do we have? We also have in the number 3 down here, we have the trunk line number 4, and remind you that that's coming up Loop 230 on the north side of the river. That's replacing the force main. So we see it down here as a number 3, but again, you know, depending on economic development desires by the city, if you put that in faster, you're likely to see development occur faster along that corridor. And lastly is the kind of the Gasly wastewater treatment plant new clarifier, because currently the clarifier that's out there today is what's limiting to that 243,000 that we spoke of earlier. But that's really kind of on the far horizon. Okay, that's kind of just down here because we knew that would be your next logical step as far as expanding that plant. We'd really, again, in the 30-year horizon, if we send the sewer over to Willow wastewater treatment plant, we really don't see in a 30-year horizon that occurring. The wild card in that, of course, is the area that we looked at from development for the city. If someone were to come in on the other side of the school, for instance, the likelihood that it would be a MUD actually would be pretty strong because there's not much infrastructure out past the school. So just the infrastructure cost to bring it back into town would be very costly. However, that would come to the Gasly wastewater treatment plant. So by and large, the city proper is largely built out. So we don't see a lot of growth in the flow for Gasly with the setup that we've recommended. So I think of the projected 2.8%, we only assume 10% growth would actually go to the Gasly.
That 2.37 million that you say goes away if we can figure out the high load culprit or culprits. We're not a very big town, and you've identified 2 or 3 of maybe the logical ones. Why is it hard? Is it enough of a volume? I'm assuming it's a large enough volume for it to be, has to be somebody significant, right?
Well, I was thinking
not
about-
necessarily. I mean, it
Okay,
could be.
so it wouldn't necessarily have to be a big person.
It could be very concentrated with a lower
Exactly.
flow, or it could be a large user, like, you know, maybe the school stripped their floors and dumped it all down the,
Right.
not saying if anyone's listening, that's not
Yeah,
what
yeah.
I'm saying,
Yeah.
but they're the other, besides the hospital, there's the other, but the hospital doesn't go to Gasly, but the
Right.
school does. So that's an opportunity to investigate as well.
And you know, you could look at it over.
$4 million is a lot of money. If we could just figure that out,
Right.
that goes away, you said.
Exactly. Right.
Robert, speaking of that, if the hospital were to decide to expand and maybe add 100 beds over there, is that within current capacity?
It's a half a LUE per bed, or do you remember what
I'd
it
have
was
to-
for?
I'd have to look again, but per bed is not a,
Is a half?
yeah, it's not a full LUE. So multiple beds would equal 1 LUE, I guess would be one of it said. So I forget what their number is. I think it's,
31 LUEs for towers.
is that what I have? Okay. Yeah. Right.
120.
So. And again, that's all goes into those factors of guesstimating in some ways, to be honest. You know, there's multiple, you know, every entity, San Antonio, Austin, Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, the Bryan College Station, all of them kind of have some metrics by which they make an assumption that a commercial user is going to produce X amount of flow. If you really want to dive deep into it, you can start looking at the actual water usage that they have through their water meter and almost back into, you know, how much sewage they're releasing because of how much water they're using.
Okay, while we're talking about this, I wanted to revisit, I told y'all about the DRRP, and I did a $4 million total. I did not include trunk line 2 or trunk line 3. So that's where I got my 4 million target, but I'm thinking what have we got to lose? That's our priority one. Let's go for 8.1 total. I have 4 more days to resubmit, so I think I'm gonna get on that.
Robert, you'll have to remind me, I know there's a set amount in that distribution, isn't there? The total dollar figure that's available from the state,
20 million.
20 million, but
Yeah.
that's statewide, isn't that right?
No, that's 20 million per project. That's the max.
Okay. Yeah, I know, I think
Harvey?
the overall budget that the state has of kind of that leftover money isn't some gargantuan number like it has been on some of these other ones. I think it's a lower amount. So it's something that you may want to talk with either your grants administrator.
Well, the max award's 20 million.
Am I
Make sure you set up a project that has a good, maybe a sweet spot here and then a
Oh,
bigger-
and yeah, we talked about that. But you don't want to get too greedy because of the score. It's a competitive grant reallocation. So yeah, got it.
So priority 1 and 2 totals like $12 million. And in that $12 million, 2.3 is the load culprit. So it's really, if you figure out the load, you're 10 million. That's not that much more than the 8 million. Why wouldn't we ask for the 10 million? Is it because of the match?
There's a law of diminishing returns, the
Okay.
match and the score. Our score, if we had an 85, 87.
Okay, so it's a
yeah.
score, okay.
So I'm following, you're adding the 8.151 to the 4.06.
Yeah, and then taking out the 237, assuming that we
So maybe
figure that
10.
out.
Okay.
That just was a rough math. So it's about basically 10 million bucks.
I would like to point out, the one thing that if all of these things were to be done, that's fantastic, right? But the expansion of wastewater treatment plant is the elephant in the room, right? It's the biggest number on the spreadsheet. It's the one that's going to take the hardest time to find the financing for, and it's inevitable. So
The 37.
on number 3, the 500,000 gallon expansion, the 16,590,000.
So if we just go for 40 million, we'll be good.
There you go. I like it.
When we build it, it'll cost 60.
So.
Any other questions for you? You covered a lot of ground.
I would love to, Robert talked about the 24 to 27 at the beginning. I'd love for him to circle back around and kind of help us understand based on, you said 23 to 26 or 27 million at the beginning, and then I wrote the notes down. What did you say? You said 24 to 27 million total cost estimates, and then the
Yeah.
subset of that was the 4 million.
You see, it's already gone up since I had the
Okay,
conversation.
so the numbers aren't tracking with what he just told us. Okay.
Exactly. So
Well, and part of what you have to be careful of, Robert, is if you look at just LAN's numbers, they didn't put contingencies, I think, on some of it. They didn't do engineering cost on it for whatever reason. So the summary table that I generated put those factors in there.
So based on
the
what
one
you,
you're showing right here.
yeah, so based on what you just heard in these numbers, what is the equivalent of the ask if it's not 24 to 27? What were you talking about doing 1 and 2? all of it?
I was doing number 1 only,
Only 1?
but I wasn't going to put trunk line 2 or 3. Or it could be some derivative. I mean, we don't have to solve what it is. I just wanted to make sure the priority 1 items got addressed before
Yeah.
we started getting
Well-
some of the other.
Well, I heard reference to by 2030. You maybe refresh, what was that reference
The
to?
2030 reference is,
Because that's 5 years from now.
that's the build out if you use the growth rate
Uh-huh.
and the 650 connections that the city has kind of already allocated to developers, if those 650 happen, and of course you match the 2.8% growth rate, by 2030, you need to be under construction with the
Okay.
expansion of the Willow wastewater treatment.
Okay. Under construction by that date, not finished.
The 90%
Okay.
rule that TCEQ
Yeah.
has.
So we've got 5 years.
21?
Page 21.
So I say, to me, the larger elephant in the room is finding the funding mechanism that'll get to that.
So speaking of the elephant in the room, and let's say that Robert goes after 10 million here and we don't get that. And we're targeting toward by 2030, 5 years from now, we've got to get to the expansion project. Our alternatives to fund this are what? Is that when we start talking about bonds? Because I'm
C of
I've
O's.
gradually been
bonds,
using this word now over the last few
Well,
months.
I think it's
and
important if you just assume for a second that 2030 is a start date, and that's for debate, but I'm just saying, let's just assume that we all agree that we want to be under construction in 2030. Back up, how much time is involved in design and planning and permitting and all that? So when would you actually have to make a commitment to start construction by January?
TQ has two rules. They're vague, we'll say, but they call it the 75%.
Right.
And the 90% rule. The 90% rule is where we're talking about 2030. The 75% rule, 2028 is when you would have to,
If we realize those assumptions of 2.8 on top of the 650.
generally what TCEQ says is, or what we've always assumed, we being the engineering industry outside of TCEQ, we looked at it as being over a course of 3 months. If you are 75% of your capacity consistently over 3 months, that kind of pulls the trigger on a 75 or a 90% rule. So that means we need to start, thinking about design and getting that underway. Obviously, it's 2-year window, but you've got, to your point, you've got permitting, you've got design plans, you've got the process of getting the money, bidding it out. 2 years is a pretty.
Well, what you're talking about is tripping a regulatory threshold, and we can somewhat control that by just not allowing the growth. I mean, we can do that. Cities do that all the time with moratoriums and other things because they don't have a plan in place to finance expansion. So they just prevent themselves from getting to that regulatory threshold. We can handle the regulatory threshold, but I'm assuming that we don't want to do that, that we want to try to embrace growth and be prepared for growth. If that's the case, then you are talking about 2028, which is 3 years.
So we're on a
away.
3-year plan now.
Yeah.
To get to the
Yeah.
37 million.
Still a 5-year to fully fund, right? But
Yeah.
you'd
I
be
mean,
able to design, you'd
Point
have
is
design
we gotta
contract,
we
and
got to
you'd-
start working on it now. I mean,
you'd
this
spend-
is not
you'd
like
start spending
waiting on
money
to the.
because You'd have your permitted capacity has to be expanded with TCEQ, that comes part of the plans as the design process happens. So you have expenditures, right? You're paying an engineer to get that permit and the plans put together, starting in 28. The big bill, the 16 million plus bill happens, when you go.
So what I'm saying to my colleagues is, this is not something that we wait for the completion of the comp plan or anything like that. This is something that we have to start on now and work on over the next 3 years. Does anybody disagree with that?
That's correct. And let's, this 2.8 growth rate that may may not happen. I've got a lot of people just hanging on developments, waiting for interest rates, this, that, and the other. And that 112 was supposed to be done 2 years ago. Well, now it's 117. We got 5 more houses, which is good. If we can get the 8 million to do scenario 1, that gives us more capacity. That kind of would change those numbers a little bit, would it not?
Well, I mean, it's almost two different problems, right?
Yeah, you got your, yeah, I
You know,
understand.
In some ways, your $8 million are fixing current issues with capacity.
Yeah.
Meaning the ship is already, or the horse is out of the stall, right? You've
Yeah.
already got issues. That's what you're almost fixing with the 8 million.
Got to have that.
And whereas the wastewater treatment plant, if you were to do the 8 million, right, and you're doing that 8 million with the planning to a build out situation. So in essence, you've opened the potential floodgates for development because you set up your infrastructure, your collection system to handle it. Now your choke point will be the wastewater treatment plant.
But the mud's that's a great option for us to do a 380 and say, oh, okay, guys, we're going to buy it back from you. That relieves the financial burden. I don't know where I'm going to find $37 million, but
We'll get there, Rob.
we'll get there.
Well, and I'll throw a few other things out there. You get a large scale development. The mud thing, the in-district mud is, one option. It's just an option. But the other is, if you have, you can pre-receive your impact fees. I mean, it could be $1 million or $1.5 million for 400 or 500 homes. You could discount the impact fees or whatever and get them paid up front. That could be your match for the grant. There's lots of ways. If you have development, if you go out and market and you get development, you can generally leverage that private part of the partnership to help you with some of the cash. If we did a grant, that would be the matching, be the dollars for the matching. The other would be just negotiating a pre-sale, a straight up pre-sale where you buy it when they get finished.
Robert, are you saying we're on a 1-year timeline to get impact fees in place?
It takes 9 to 12 months to go through the process to figure out how you implement that. I mean, there's actual local government code process that you have to follow with identifying an impact fee commission and then of course it's calculating what those are based upon the development coming in, right? So
Well, should we tee that up for like the January meeting?
no, let me do some more, possibly, let me do some research. I'm still gathering information. I have a strategy, but I'm not there yet.
Okay.
So January, February, sure. Sounds good.
So what actions do we need to take tonight? Are we going to accept this plan? Is that what we're going to do?
That would be the action that you would take. You've already given me guidance to go instead of 4, let's do 8 point.
Well, I mean, I really think that, I mean, I hear you. I don't know enough about the scoring and everything. That's not my expertise. So I would defer to others. If they think the score is too low and it diminishes our chances, I'm not going to, but I would say the difference between $8 and $10 million is not dramatic. And if we're going to go through the trouble and we don't think it severely diminishes our odds to try to get it and to really try to figure out where that 2-3, how we get that 237 off of the ledger.
So this is a motion to direct the city manager to pursue. Do we need to take action?
I
I think we just need to accept the final plan, right?
accept the plan and I've got the guidance to
And
go
you-
forward.
You've got the minutes and the notes for, he's got the guidance to go forward and do that. So we don't need that in the motion, right?
Just
You want
accept the plan, yeah.
Mayor, move that we accept the Bevco Engineering Wastewater Treatment Facility Expansion Study Final Report as presented.
Second.
A motion's been made and second. All in favor? 1, 2. Approved. All right.
Thank you,
got
guys.
Very, very enlightening. Thank you.
Very good.
Glad you guys find it useful. That's always our hope.
Y'all
One of
good?
our most productive meetings, at least for me. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, can we give you a couple extra bucks so we could have?
Sure. I know it's in PDF.
I was trying to save costs, but we can, you got, it was me. I said just 3 is fine. We can share. There's links to all this stuff, but I don't mind hard copy. They're only like $15, right?
Okay, well, I'm going to adjourn the meeting and